let's talk about our guest. Now, Claire Best has been on our channel before, and she is an absolute gold mine of information. She's an investigative reporter, an investigative journalist, and she has done a deep dive into this. And when she reached out and was like, hey, Larry, did you know that FTX, Amber Heard, Michelle Dauber, and Title IX are all connected? Did you just say FTX? Are you talking about the biggest cryptocurrency scandal of like the 20th century? Let's talk about it. So here she is without further ado. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Larry.
How on earth is FTX involved in all of this?
Absolutely. So Sam Bankman-Fried, who founded FTX, is the son of a Stanford feminist law professor called Barbara Fried, who works in the same Stanford law department as Michelle Dauber, who Amber Heard credited for the METOO movement. And Michelle Dauber founded this nonprofit called Enough Voter Movement, which was specifically to target primarily male Republicans, but I think there were some male Democrats as well, to accuse them of sexual assault, rightly or wrongly, and to use that and the media behind that to basically oust those candidates to get in female Democrat candidates. And I, have long been what I call a traditional feminist, but I will not stand up and support false accusations that ruin people's lives, and they're raising money off it and they're getting votes for it. So going back to how does FTX play into all of this? Michelle Dauber started this Enough Voter movement. And around the same time, Sam Bankman-Fried started Alameda Research. So this is fall 2017. In 2018, his mother, the Stanford law professor, she started another nonprofit called Mind the Gap out of Stanford that was registered to Sam Bankman-Fried's parents' house on the campus at Stanford, and where he is allegedly now. Mind the Gap was a nonprofit that was supposed to guide big donors for the Democratic Party to specific campaigns. So Mind the Gap then started up in 2018. And this guy, Graham Gottlieb, who was one of the guys who started it, who came out of Obama's 2012 campaign, he had been a fellow researcher at Stanford. His bio on the Stanford site has actually been taken down now, but there's a little bit of it that is left, which essentially shows that what he was researching was how mind-brain science would integrate with federal policies and so forth. Mind the Gap at the time, and he particularly talked about gaming the system. They were gaming the system to win elections with this Mind the Gap and telling people where to put their money, put it into this race, that race, wherever else. Mind the Gap started in 2018. Then Mind the Gap Research started in April 2019, registered to this guy, Graham Gottlieb, at Sam Bankman-Fried's parents' house on the Stanford campus. And then in a little bit later in 2019, FTX started up. And on the 8th of April 2020, Joe Biden is announced as the presumptive nominee. Now, what happens? But Tara Reade accuses Joe Biden of, in fact, specifically of digital penetration. She was broadly kind of dismissed by the entire Democratic establishment. The New York Times admitted later that they took 3 weeks to comment on it, that they had revised their articles to make Joe Biden look more favorable. It later came out that SKDK, which is the Democratic Party PR firm, that they had spent, I think, something like $2 million to discredit Tara Reade. But what was interesting about that is that Michelle Dauber came out onto Twitter and said, begging the Democratic DNC to get Joe Biden to step down, not to run, because and in fact, in one tweet, she said, "We don't want Watergate 2. And I always thought we don't want Watergate 2 meant that she didn't want the whole fakeness of the whole Me Too movement to unravel. So the other element that ties into this was I looked up Michelle Dauber, and lo and behold, Michelle Dauber started a nonprofit at her own home address in Palo Alto in 2008 with Davida Brooke. And who is Davida Brooke? Well, she was Amber Heard's attorney. When it became known that the Washington Post METOO op-ed had been created for Amber Heard by the ACLU, Amber Heard's legal team quit abruptly without any explanation. And the people who quit included Davida Brooke. But I'm now of the opinion that that Washington Post op-ed literally directly had Michelle Dauber's involvement in it, in creating it. And the reason I say that is because there's a paragraph in it that talks about Title IX and sexual assault on campus. And Michelle Dauber was the co-author of the unregulated 2011 Dear Colleague letter that was launched in New Hampshire by Joe Biden and led to all this campus kangaroo courts. And the crypto thing goes back to then as well. In 2009, the Department of Justice started funding the University of New Hampshire, where the Dear Colleague letter was introduced. Know Your Power and bystander training went on to get more funding from the Department of Justice, were introduced in schools and colleges around the states, around the nation and across the world. And then in 2018, they went under the umbrella of a thing called Soteria Solutions. And Soteria Solutions is based out of the University of New Hampshire. It is a for-profit enterprise, and it coincidentally shares the exact same logo as Soteria Finance Holdings in London. Soteria Finance Holdings deals in Binance and Bitcoin, and it is owned by another company in Luxembourg that is owned by somebody called Steven Schwartzman in New York, who is BlackRock. And Sam Bankman-Fried has been tied to BlackRock. So I would like to know if our public funds have gone to the University of New Hampshire via the Department of Justice that's being sold around the country, around the world under Soteria. I can't say that it is. I just find it very curious. And now in London, in UK, they've introduced Operation Soteria, which is supposed to increase the successful prosecutions of sex offences. And it's like, I'm not interested in increasing or decreasing the prosecution of sex offences. What I'd like to see is a fair and just process, a due process. But what we're seeing is that, justice, more than ever, is being manipulated by the use of social media, by paid partnerships, this disgusting fusion between the Department of Justice and our education systems. Stanford right now is facing all sorts of ethical complaints. The Stanford Daily even admitted that they made a false statement about one of their professors for scientific discoveries that were false. The Stanford is facing a official Title IX complaint for sex discrimination, gender bias. And, you find out that basically we're being manipulated so much by FTX, by these donations, by Mind the Gap, by Michelle Dauber, by the Enough Voter movement, by their partnerships with political PR companies. So in line with political PR companies, Amber Heard had a political PR company called Precision Strategies until the end of the first week of the Virginia trial, when they split company. I looked into Precision Strategies. Precision Strategies was founded by a woman called Stephanie Cutter, who coincidentally was Obama's PR strategist for the 2012 election campaign. Precision Strategies also happens to represent the ACLU and Planned Parenthood. And Stephanie Cutter, in her bio, talks specifically about her relations with the Washington Post, with Rolling Stone, with Politico magazine, and a few others. But those three particularly, which are all ones that have essentially been very much aligned with the Amber Heard narrative. But Amber Heard has been a spokesperson, I believe, for UN Women as well, who as well as L'Oreal, are also represented by SKDK. And SKDK is a political PR company that also represents Pfizer. It represents the government of Ukraine. It represents Prince Albert of Monaco, AT&T. It represents Disney, which owns ABC. And they represent a nonprofit called Vital Voices, which was founded by Madeleine Albright and Hillary Clinton in 1997 with money from the Clinton Foundation. And the Clinton Foundation was founded in part by Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein's survivors have actually been pushing for discovery on the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Global Foundation for how their money has spent. And then, as some people may have seen in the last few days, the Attorney General of the US Virgin Islands sued the bank JP Morgan, accusing JP Morgan of essentially being complicit in Jeffrey Epstein's alleged sex trafficking. And 4 days after she filed this suit, she got fired by the governor of the US Virgin Islands. And who happened to be in the US Virgin Islands at this time? Joe Biden. Who really knows what's at the bottom of all of this? But it's dark and it's dirty, and things keep getting taken off the table, taken out of public view. How did it get this far? They're trying to kind of downplay it, and they're feeling sorry for his parents and so forth. And I'm sorry, I don't feel sorry for his parents. You don't buy a $16 million house in the Bahamas if you're a tax attorney and a law professor and claim that actually it was, even though it says it's a holiday home on the listing, that it was meant to be part of the company. I think that they're all covering this up, and I feel really aggrieved by this, because you have these students around the country at Stanford, everywhere, who have nothing like the privileges of these people, who are basically preaching to the rest of us their, woke ideology for, effective altruism, earning a lot of money and giving it all away. And it's like, you look into it, and what are they doing? They're giving it to their friends. They're pretending that they care about diversity, equity, inclusion, feminism, blah, blah, blah. It's all rubbish. It's all a front. And I find it really upsetting and dismissive of the public and the public's interests and our children. And so why am I here fighting all of this? Because I feel like it's our children's futures. And, if we're not going to leave our children with a more ethical, better world, what are we doing?
I couldn't have said it better.
An activist is someone who is passionate about what they believe in, but will answer questions with reasoning behind what they believe. A propagandist is someone who sings the song, but who can't answer questions rationally and then just shuts you down. Michelle Dauber is a propagandist. Mm-hmm. She doesn't answer questions. She runs away. She spouts all sorts of, venomous, hateful things on the internet. She's racist. And I think she's a misogynist as well as a misandrist. And, I think we have to really take people like that on head on and call them out. And they're surrounded by this network of these activist journalists like Kat Tenenbaum, like Taylor Lorenz, like Susan Zalkind, that, you can literally pull them out. And there's a whole list of these, so-called activist feminist journalists. They're not activist feminist journalists at all. They're propagandist feminist journalists. And they're tied into this network with these political PR companies, coming up with these narratives for Amber Heard. And the ACLU said in 2016, in summer 2016, in fact, that she had given her $3.5 million of the $7 million divorce settlement to the ACLU. The ACLU stated that. They knew that she hadn't. So the ACLU lied. The head of the ACLU, Anthony D. Romero, also comes out of Stanford Law School. Then she appears in November 2016 with Michelle Dauber to get the Women of the Year award for Emily Doe, aka Chanel Miller. I believe that due process, if we were ever allowed to have it, would reveal that Michelle Dauber is behind a ton of this.